Hi, gang. Welcome to another design diary. And the topic today is children, or specifically children and how those work in the game, not children playing the game, although they are welcome to play the game as well if they want. I don't think there's anything offensive or inappropriate in there. From the very initial conception of the game, it's always been about trying to succeed in academia, but I've also always had some element of what's happening in your personal life and trying to find this sort of work-life balance. Because I think that's a useful thing to model. And from a gameplay standpoint, it'd be really easy if you could just throw all your time and effort into your career and doing research 24 hours a day and such. And I wanted there to be competing things pulling on you to spend time in other places. One aspect of the personal life, and this is one of the things that's changed a lot over various iterations, was having children. And, maybe because it's an issue for a lot of people, or maybe because I'm a parent, it was something that I thought was really important to have some way of modeling that within the game. Here's the challenge. In real life, people have children for all sorts of reasons, and there's, joy you get from being a parent, from interacting with your kids, from seeing them progress and all that. But in the game world, where what you were ultimately trying to do was become a successful academic in the game, it was very hard to sort of model that. I remember at one point I was racking my brain on this and trying to figure some things out. Just said, the problem is there's no advantage to having kids. And from a purely career-based standpoint in academia, I would say that's largely true. The main thing you're short on is time, and children take a lot of your time. And they also take money. Those are your two currencies in the game, is you have money to spend and you have your time to spend. And they take up both of those that then you're not using professionally. So this was something that I was sort of struggling with and tried some different things. And in one of the playtests, I remember one of the players said, I was trying to kind of get my family life going before I got into an academic job, like trying that as a strategy. And I just really felt like I was just getting further and further behind everyone else because I was, getting married and starting to have kids, and none of this was helping me in the game at all. And I thought that was a really astute observation. And strategically, I like the idea that there's different approaches you could take, kind of like pursue your career first and get that going, or pursue family first and kind of get your life settled there and then take your career, and that there could potentially be ways to win either way. But also, I think that player was really just getting at there was not enough of a benefit to kind of having kids to the way the game was being scored. That actually ended up being one of the major impetuses for having the sort of professional and personal achievements separated out and sort of force the player to get some of each, so that you couldn't just focus in all on one thing or couldn't focus on another. Once I sort of figured that out, I was like, okay, well then having kids is a personal achievement, and kind of every kid you have gives you another achievement on that side. There's other ways to get personal achievements as well. You're not just trying to crank out 50 kids. That actually reflected, I think, the reality of there's things you do in your personal life that you don't do because they're good for your career. You do because you want to do them and they make you happy as a person. And that idea of separating the personal and professional achievements largely came out of figuring out kids. I'll show you here. This is not the current board, but an earlier version of part of the board where it was keeping track of the kids. And again, this is from an iteration where there's text and stuff all over the place. So current is much simpler, but kind of gives you a sense of still largely how it's working. Each of these represents a year and the kids move forward. And, when you first have a kid, then the first year you have to take care of them. They take more time. So these are the amount of time units that you have to spend taking care of your kid each year. And then as they get older, they're taking less time. I will say, as my kids are getting older, I'm not sure that's exactly true. I think you're spending time doing different things, but definitely compared to like when they were a baby or a toddler and like can't be left alone for 10 seconds, they definitely take less time as they're getting old in terms of the time you have to devote to the childcare. And so as they're going forward, you're spending some of your time here, but then you're getting a personal achievement for that. If you have several kids as they're getting older, they're not taking a huge amount of your time total, so you can still progress in your career. There's also some other options for if you want to spend money to either hire a nanny or send your kids to daycare instead of spending all that childcare time yourself. Not advising for or against that in real life, but in the game, it does give you that option if you're like, man, I really need some time this year. In this case, my time is worth more than the money. I'll spend the money to get some of the childcare taken care of. Something else I'll note while we're looking at this board is that you don't just automatically get a kid, right? We all know people who have said, yeah, we're trying, and some people it takes a long time to get pregnant. Some people it happens right away, but I didn't want it to just be something where you said, hey, I want a kid, and boom, you get one. So I came up with this mechanic that I actually really like for its simplicity, which was just you rolled a dice. In this case, it was a D20. I've actually changed this mechanic a little bit since then. But to have a kid, you just had to get a roll greater than the current year. So what this did was very easily mirrored the fact that as you get older in real life, which would be the equivalent of the year in the game getting higher, it might get harder to get pregnant. So if it's year 17 or 18 and you're in your late 30s or early 40s, if you graduated from college in the early 20s, it's getting harder to get pregnant and have a baby. There's also an option, the sort of thematic idea here would be you're paying for a fertility treatment or something where you can increase your chances. So you pay some money and you get to add to whatever your role is to increase your chance of having a kid. Like I said, the exact details of how this works are a little different in the current incarnation, but it's basically the same concept that as the years go on, it gets more difficult. And I thought that was a pretty cool mechanic because it was just so simple, tying to the number of years with the roll of dice. Last thing I'll note while looking at this is this thing here, all child requirements must be met or you lose. There are a lot of things in the game where you're required to spend time on something. So if you have an academic job and you're supposed to be teaching classes, you have to spend time teaching those classes. And if you don't, there's penalties. So depending on how egregious the situation is, maybe some of your ratings go down in terms of how you're viewed in the institution, in terms of your teaching score, or you get fired if it's a big problem. But you're still around. In this case, and this is the only case like this in the game, I wanted to just make something that wasn't optional. I didn't want to try to deal with, well, then Child Protective Services comes in and you have to deal with that, because that would be getting way far afield of the main core of the game. This is just one of those things like, hey, if you're choosing to have kids here, you have to spend the time to take care of them. That is not optional. There's no penalty where you say, well, I'll take care of them less and, take a hit to my attributes or something like that. That's something that potentially could be changed. I'd be curious what people think, particularly if maybe there was some attribute, which I don't have right now. They're all sort of professionally focused, but if there's some sort of personal life attribute with how you're doing there, maybe that's something where if you don't spend enough time taking care of your kids, that goes down. Or if you get that attribute to a very high level, maybe you're really great at taking care of your kids and very efficient, and you don't need to spend as much time on it to get the same benefit as somebody else or something like that. I don't know. I'd be curious to get feedback on that and just feedback on how kids are being handled in the game overall. Maybe somebody else has a brilliant idea that I didn't come up with about, oh, here's the benefit to having kids and how it affects your professional life and helps you move that forward. But for now, I actually think it works pretty well with the personal and professional achievements and kind of having to balance those out. That actually was something where the fact that it was a challenge to figure out how to integrate kids and make that actually a choice someone might want to make in the game, to have some game benefit to you for having kids, that actually turned out to be, I think, an overall positive because it opened up a wider range of things that could be personal achievements that don't have to tie into your professional life, and got back to this core idea of sort of a work-life balance that had been a thing early on in the game, and then in some of the subsequent iterations, I was really focused on developing the professional side of it and kind of lost a little track of the personal. So that's kind of where I'm at with that right now. I hope that was interesting. Again, any thoughts on kids, academia, how kids should fit into this game or count? Love to hear them, and I will see you next time.